All right, so today we're diving into a topic that I think a lot of people are fascinated by, but also maybe a little bit afraid of, and that's plane crashes.
Oh, yeah.
We got an article sent in called Plane Crashes, Causes, Impact, and Safety Measures.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people want to understand, like, what causes these things, right?
Yeah.
What's the impact, beyond just those sort of, like, horrific headlines, and then, what's being done to prevent them. So get ready for a deep dive, because we're going to try to answer all those questions.
Yeah, and I think we're going to find that even though this is, a dramatic topic, there's actually a lot of reassurance we can find in how the industry thinks about this.
It's good to hear because, while I realize that flying is statistically very safe, you can't help but get a little bit like, uneasy when you see those headlines about crashes.
Sure.
And you think about it, but the article does spell it out, like right at the top, by saying, millions of flights take off and land without a hitch every year, right? It's those rare incidents that tend to capture our attention.
Yeah, it's that old news adage, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right, exactly.
But getting into what causes those rare events and then how the industry learns from them is actually what makes flying safer.
Okay, so the article dives right into the like different stages of flight where things can go wrong, right?
Mm.
Takeoff, cruising, descent, landing. Basically, no point is immune to potential problems, right?
Right. And even with all the advances we have in technology and pilot training, we still got to contend with these three main factors: human error, those inevitable mechanical gremlins,
Right.
and then, of course, the whims of Mother Nature.
Let's start with the human side of things, right? The article states that pilot error accounts for roughly 50 to 60% of all aviation accidents.
Wow.
That's pretty startling, right? I mean, these pilots undergo such rigorous training, so what's going on there?
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating is that it's often not a matter of skill or knowledge, but the psychological factors when they're under pressure.
Hmm.
So even experienced pilots, they can make mistakes when faced with an emergency or some kind of unexpected situation.
Right, so even with all the training, sometimes instinct takes over, and it might not be the right instinct.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond those split-second decisions, there's other things that come into play like fatigue.
Sure.
Think about when you drive your car and you're tired, your concentration can waver.
Absolutely.
Now imagine being a pilot with hundreds of lives in your hands and you're battling jet lag or just some kind of disrupted sleep schedule.
Yeah, that would be a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
The article also mentions miscommunication
Hmm.
as a major contributor to human error, right? You always see those scenes in movies where pilots are like struggling to understand air traffic control,
Right.
is that a real concern?
Oh, absolutely. Clear communication is just critical in aviation, especially during those really critical phases of flight and any kind of breakdown, whether it's between the pilots, air traffic control, or even ground crews. It can really have some pretty serious consequences.
Okay, so human error is a big one.
Yeah.
But even if we had, perfectly trained, well-rested pilots with crystal clear communication,
Yeah.
there's still the issue of mechanical failure, right? I mean, planes are complex machines
Oh, they are.
with all kinds of things that can go wrong.
They are. And even with all the maintenance schedules and safety checks, things still can go wrong.
Right.
Like the article mentions, like engine malfunctions,
Sure.
structural defects, electrical system failures. Like there's
Yeah, I always think about, like, what if an engine just fails mid-flight? Or,
Yes.
like, what happens if there's, like, a crack in the plane that nobody found?
Right. It's possible, but thankfully rare.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. The engineers and the crews are always working to make sure they identify potential issues before they become catastrophic.
Okay.
They're always playing this what if game.
Right.
They're looking for even the slightest signs of wear and tear.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
But even with the best technology and human expertise, there's one wild card we just can't control: weather.
Oh, yeah.
I've been on some rough flights,
Of course.
and I've always wondered how pilots can, navigate those turbulent skies.
Yeah, weather's definitely one of the most challenging aspects of flying.
Okay.
Severe weather, it creates these really hazardous conditions, from the turbulence we talked about to lightning strikes to just blinding fog.
Yeah, I was on a flight once where we hit some really bad turbulence.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was so unsettling. It's like,
It's scary.
and the article says that turbulence can make it difficult for pilots to even maintain control of the aircraft.
Yeah, I mean, imagine trying to steer a car on a road that's constantly shifting and shaking.
Right.
That's essentially what pilots are dealing with during severe turbulence.
Wow, yeah.
They use their training and their instruments and their quick reflexes
Yeah.
to try and keep the plane on course.
And lightning strikes, right. What happens when a plane gets hit by lightning? I've always been curious about that.
It's not as dramatic as the movies make it seem.
Okay.
Modern aircraft, they're designed to withstand those strikes. They kind of act like a Faraday cage, channeling that electrical current around the cabin.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so the passengers and crew are safe inside, but while it might not, bring a plane down, it could disrupt electrical systems
Okay.
and cause damage that needs immediate attention.
So lightning is not going to, like, fry the plane from the inside out,
No, not
but it
usually.
could still cause problems.
Right.
And then fog? Right. I mean, it seems like it would be so challenging for pilots, especially when they're trying to land.
Oh, absolutely. Poor visibility. It makes landing and takeoff is super risky.
Okay.
Pilots, they have to rely on their instruments and their knowledge of the airport
Right.
to navigate safely.
It makes you realize how much trust we put in these pilots, you know?
Yeah, right. I mean, trust and rigorous training, those are the cornerstones of aviation safety.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of unexpected threats, one that surprised me was bird strikes.
Really?
I always figured a bird hitting a plane was like a bug hitting a windshield. But the article makes it clear that these things can be serious.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
It's not just a little thump.
You're talking about a large bird, high speed.
Right. You're talking about damage to engines, windshields, critical parts of the aircraft.
And wasn't there a famous incident, Miracle on the Hudson?
Right.
Wasn't that caused by a bird strike?
Exactly. Where both engines on that U.S. Airways flight
Oh, wow.
were disabled shortly after takeoff.
Yeah, I remember that story.
We're going to get into that story later, but it illustrates perfectly how even a small thing like a bird strike can have really big consequences.
Okay, so we got human error, mechanical issues, weather hazards, bird strikes, all these things.
Yep.
What else can bring a plane down? What about fuel problems? Does the article talk about that?
Yeah, it does. Running out of fuel
Okay.
or having contaminated fuel, that can lead to engine failure, which then forces, an emergency landing or worse.
Right.
Fuel management, it's a really critical part of flight planning, and even slight miscalculations or oversights can have serious consequences.
Okay, so that's another thing to worry about.
Yeah.
But, there's some threats that are harder to predict and prevent, like sabotage, hijackings, terrorist attacks.
Mm-hmm.
The article touches on that stuff, right?
It does.
Huh.
These things are thankfully rare, but they've had a huge impact on aviation history.
Sure.
After 9/11, airport security and in-flight procedures completely changed.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that while we can't eliminate all risks, we can learn from those past events and take steps to make those attacks harder to pull off.
Yeah, absolutely. 9/11 was a turning point, I think, in so many ways.
Right.
And how we think about safety and security, especially when it comes to travel.
Exactly.
But even though those large-scale attacks are rare, the article also talks about mid-air collisions.
Right.
It's always been one of my, biggest fears, two planes colliding in midair.
Yeah, it's understandable,
Yeah.
but they're infrequent.
Great.
But they can happen.
Right.
And
Yeah.
factors like radar system failures,
Okay.
miscommunication, navigation errors, those all increase the risks.
So we've covered a lot here.
With.
Human errors, mechanical issues, weather,
Yep.
bird strikes, fuel problems,
Uh-huh.
even potential sabotage
Yeah.
or collisions.
Right.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
It can be a little unsettling.
Yeah, but I think it's important to look at specific examples to see the impact and lessons learned.
Absolutely. Let's delve into some of the most notable plane crashes,
Okay.
starting with the Tenerife airport disaster.
Yeah, Tenerife, it's a tragic story, a really unfortunate series of events that led to the deadliest aviation accident in history. Back in 1977, two Boeing 747s
Okay.
collided on the runway at Tenerife Airport.
Wow.
583 lives were lost.
I've heard of it, but I don't know the details.
Well, it started with a bomb threat
Oh, what?
at a different airport, and that caused a bunch of flights, including those 747s, to
Yeah.
divert to Tenerife.
Okay.
And then dense fog rolled in.
So they're already dealing with this, stressful situation,
Yeah.
and then they got limited visibility.
Yeah, it was a nightmare.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, there was miscommunication between the pilots and air traffic control.
Okay.
One of the planes was taxiing on the runway,
Uh-huh.
getting ready to take off, and the other plane mistakenly lined up on the same runway,
Oh.
thinking it was clear.
So they were basically on a collision course and didn't even realize it.
Yeah, essentially, by the time they saw each other through the fog, it was too late.
Oh, man.
It really shows how crucial clear communication is in aviation,
Yeah.
One misunderstanding can be disastrous.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Tenerife airport disaster led to a lot of changes in cockpit procedures and air traffic control protocols,
Okay.
all to try to prevent something like that from ever happening again.
Right.
It's a reminder that even with the best technology and training, human error is still a factor,
Right.
and communication is key.
It's amazing to think that one event can have this ripple effect throughout the entire industry,
Yeah.
leading to all these like safety improvements.
It's the silver lining, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
These tragedies, while heartbreaking, they often lead to important changes.
Okay, so we talked about Tenerife, which was a collision, right?
Yeah.
Caused by a series of unfortunate events.
Right.
But the article also mentions Malaysia Airlines flight MH370.
Yeah.
And that's a totally different kind of aviation mystery.
Right, it just vanished.
Yeah.
MH370 is one of the most perplexing aviation mysteries ever.
Okay.
In 2014, this flight disappeared over the Indian Ocean,
Right.
239 passengers and crew,
Yeah.
and despite a huge search, the main wreckage has never been found.
I remember this case. It was everywhere. And it's still baffling to me that a plane can just disappear in this day and age.
It is, and it's a mystery that continues to haunt the aviation world.
So we have Tenerife, a tragic collision,
Mm-hmm.
and then MH370, an unsolved mystery.
Right.
Does the article talk about any other crashes?
It does. It talks about Air France Flight 447, which crashed into the Atlantic Ocean in 2009.
Okay.
And this one shows how technical failures and human error can combine
Okay.
to create a catastrophic outcome.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the plane ran into a series of sensor failures,
Okay.
and that caused the autopilot to disconnect.
Oh, wow.
And that put the pilots in a really tough spot.
Right.
And unfortunately, they made some errors in how they responded.
So it was like a perfect storm of technical problems and human mistakes.
Exactly.
Right.
The sensor failures caused confusion
Mhm.
and stress.
Okay.
And the pilots, under that pressure, made decisions that led to the plane stalling and crashing.
It's tragic how, like, these failures, both technical and human,
Right.
can have such huge consequences.
Yeah. But the hope is that by studying these crashes, the industry can learn and make improvements
Right.
to prevent similar accidents in the future.
Right.
You know, every crash is thoroughly investigated,
Uh-huh.
and they use the findings to improve protocols, training, aircraft design.
Okay.
It's a continuous process.
It's good to know that even though these things happen,
Yeah.
they're not in vain.
Right.
The industry is trying to learn from them and make flying safer.
Right. Each incident is a harsh reminder that safety's a journey.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty heavy stuff. Tenerife, MH370, Air France Flight 447.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder, why do we even fly?
It's a valid question.
Right.
But we got to remember, for every tragic incident,
Uh-huh.
there are tons of flights that take off and land safely every day.
Right.
And behind those safe flights is a whole network of people working to keep us safe.
That's a good point. We tend to focus on, like, the fear of flying, right?
Yeah.
But we forget about all the people working behind the scenes.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to talk about this stuff.
Okay.
To understand the risks, but also to appreciate all the efforts being made to reduce those risks.
Okay, so before we get to the next part,
Oh.
let's take a break from the doom and gloom.
Sure.
Let's talk about a story you mentioned earlier, the Miracle on the Hudson.
Oh, yeah.
I want to hear more about how that bird strike led to a plane landing safely on a river.
It's an amazing story of skill and resilience.
Okay.
So back in 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia
Okay.
in New York City. And shortly after takeoff, they hit a flock of geese.
Oh.
Both engines failed.
No engines. Shortly after takeoff over
Yeah.
a major city.
Yeah, it was a nightmare.
What did they do?
Well, Captain Sullenberger,
Okay.
with all his experience and composure,
Right.
he took control.
Okay, but what are your options when you have no engines?
Yeah, well, he figured out pretty quickly that getting back to LaGuardia or going to another airport, it just wasn't possible.
Right.
So he made a very difficult decision to attempt a water landing on the Hudson River.
A water landing.
A water landing.
That's so risky. Planes aren't boats.
It was an incredible maneuver.
Wow.
But Sully landed the plane smoothly on the river.
Oh my gosh.
All 155 passengers and crew survived thanks to his skill
Wow.
and the quick work of the ferry boat captains that came to help.
This really shows the pressure these pilots are under.
Yeah.
How do they even train for that?
That's where the simulators come in.
Right.
They spend hours and hours in simulators practicing all kinds of emergencies,
Right.
including engine failures.
Okay.
They're put through incredibly realistic situations, so
Okay.
they're ready for anything.
So it's like building that muscle memory
Exactly.
for those crisis situations.
That's exactly what it is.
Wow.
And Miracle on the Hudson proves that the training works.
That's an incredible story.
It-
It shows that even when it seems impossible,
Yeah.
human skill and ingenuity can come through.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that even though we talk about all the things that can go wrong,
Yeah,
there are also stories of amazing saves and triumphs.
absolutely. So we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, exploring the causes of plane crashes, some gripping stories from history, and even a miraculous escape on the Hudson.
We have.
I'm ready to move on to the next phase of our exploration, understanding the impact of these crashes and what's being done to make flying safer.
All right, let's do it.
And we'll get to that right after this break. So we've explored all sorts of things that can cause these plane crashes, from human error to mechanical issues, weather, even those bird strikes.
Right.
But now I want to shift gears and think about the impact, right? The article really emphasizes that it's not just about the twisted metal and the broken parts.
Yeah, that's so true. Plane crashes have this ripple effect that goes way beyond the scene of the accident, you know? The human cost is immeasurable. Lives are lost. Families are devastated. Survivors are dealing with trauma and grief.
Right.
It's just a stark reminder that behind every statistic, there's a real person.
Yeah, it's hard to even think about. And beyond the human toll, there's also like a big economic impact, right?
Absolutely. Airlines face lawsuits, compensation claims, potential damage to their reputation, not to mention the cost of replacing the aircraft.
Right.
And then you've got the aircraft manufacturers.
Right.
You know, if a crash is linked to a design flaw, they might face recalls, redesigns, a lot of scrutiny.
It's like this wave of consequences that just spreads.
Yeah, exactly. But those ripples can also lead to positive changes. Every
Like her.
crash triggers an investigation, and those findings often lead to big changes in regulations, aircraft design, pilot training, things like that.
So it's like, as tragic as it is, it underscores how important it is to learn from these accidents and try to prevent future ones.
Exactly. It's a cycle tragedy and improvement.
Okay.
Constantly trying to make flying safer based on what we've learned.
So we've talked about the human factor,
Right.
right? Are there ways to reduce the risk of human error even further? I mean, we can't just, like, get rid of humans entirely, can we?
Well, not yet anyway, but there are a lot of efforts to minimize those risks. One thing is improving cockpit design and automation,
Okay.
trying to create systems that are more intuitive so it reduces the mental burden on the pilots, especially during those critical phases of flight.
So it's like making the systems more user-friendly, so there's less room for error.
Exactly. Think of it like designing a car dashboard, right?
Okay.
It's clear, concise, and it anticipates what the driver might need.
Right.
Same principles apply to the cockpit.
Okay.
And then there's research into fatigue management. We talked about how pilot fatigue is a big deal.
Yeah.
And airlines are looking at ways to make pilot schedules better, ensure they get enough rest, and develop strategies for recognizing and managing fatigue.
It's good to know that they're taking this stuff seriously.
Yeah.
But even with all these efforts, there are going to be those unpredictable situations, right? Where pilots have to make split-second decisions in an emergency.
Absolutely. And that's what all that simulator training is for.
Right.
Pilots spend hours upon hours in those simulators,
Yeah.
practicing all kinds of emergencies, engine failures, bad weather, system malfunctions, you name it. It's
Right.
all in a safe environment.
So they're basically getting exposed to all these extreme scenarios
Right.
so they can develop the skills to react in real life.
Exactly. Building that muscle memory for crisis situations.
Right.
So when something unexpected happens, they can respond quickly.
It's better to sweat in the simulator than panic in the cockpit, for sure.
Exactly. And speaking of sweating and panicking,
Okay.
another thing that can affect safety is stress.
Oh, yeah. Right.
We think of pilots as these calm and collected people,
Right. Right.
but they're under a ton of pressure.
I mean, what kind of stressors are we talking about?
Well, there's the pressure to stay on schedule,
Right.
navigate through all that air traffic,
Sure.
deal with unexpected delays, weather changes, and of course, they've got to make sure all the passengers are safe and comfortable.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a high-stakes job.
I get stressed just thinking about driving in rush hour traffic. So what are they doing to address this stress issue?
Well, there's a big focus now on pilot well-being, creating a more supportive work environment.
Okay.
Airlines are realizing that a happy and healthy pilot is a safer pilot.
That's a good point. Yeah, if you're feeling burnt out, you're not going to be at your best no matter what you're doing.
Right, so there are programs focused on healthy lifestyles, counseling services,
Okay.
encouraging open communication about stress and fatigue,
Sure.
even things like yoga and mindfulness training.
So it's like a more holistic approach.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it makes sense. If pilots feel supported, they're more likely to be alert and focused and able to handle those high-pressure moments.
And that leads to a really crucial aspect of safety.
Yeah.
Creating what they call a culture of safety.
Yes, exactly.
What does that even mean?
It's about creating an environment where everyone, the pilots, air traffic controllers, maintenance crews, everyone feels like they can speak up about safety concerns,
Okay.
report errors, share lessons they've learned without being afraid of getting in trouble.
So it's like safety is everyone's top priority.
Yeah,
And everyone feels comfortable raising concerns.
exactly. A culture of safety is all about transparency
Okay.
and open communication, which are essential for identifying potential hazards and preventing accidents.
So it's like, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's more like, if you see something that could compromise safety, you got to speak up.
Exactly. And it's not just about speaking up when something's wrong. It's about sharing best practices, learning from each other, and always looking for ways to get better.
So it's like this really complex system that contributes to aviation safety.
It is a mix of technology, human expertise, training, and a culture that puts safety above everything else.
It's amazing, and it's constantly evolving and adapting.
Right. Speaking of new challenges, one area that's getting a lot of attention and maybe a little bit of fear is AI.
AI. In airplanes, that sounds like a sci-fi movie.
I know, right?
We're talking self-driving cars, but now self-flying planes. What's going on?
It's not as futuristic as it sounds. AI is already being used in the cockpit.
Really?
Yeah, some modern aircraft have AI systems that help pilots with things like navigation, fuel management, even controlling the plane.
So it's like having a super smart co-pilot.
Yeah, something like that.
That's pretty wild.
It is, but the idea isn't to replace human pilots completely.
Okay.
It's more about giving them a helping hand.
Uh-huh.
AI can process tons of data and make calculations way faster than we can,
Right.
which can be really helpful in those stressful situations.
That makes sense, especially when you think about all the factors that can lead to stress and fatigue.
Right, but wouldn't relying too much on AI make us complacent?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, what about human oversight?
That's a valid concern, and it's something people are talking about a lot as AI becomes more common in aviation.
Okay.
The key is to find that balance, using the benefits of AI while still having humans in control.
It's like with self-driving cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
The technology is amazing, but there's still this big question of, like, the ethics of it all
Exactly.
and how to make sure it's safe when machines are making decisions that could affect human lives.
Yeah, those same ethical considerations apply to AI in aviation. It's not just about the technology itself.
Right.
It's about using it responsibly and making sure safety is always the top priority.
So AI has the potential to revolutionize things, but we got to be careful.
Exactly. Embracing innovation while keeping safety front and center and making sure humans are still at the heart of aviation.
So AI is one area that's changing things. What else is out there?
Well, we can't forget about autonomous flight.
Autonomous flight. You mean planes flying themselves with no human pilot? That sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, but it's not just a concept anymore.
Really?
There's a lot of research happening in this area.
Wow.
And while we're not going to see fully autonomous passenger flights anytime soon,
Right.
the technology is getting there.
I can see how that could be really appealing from a safety standpoint, right? No human error.
Yeah, that's one of the main arguments for it, right?
Right.
Take human fallibility out of the equation and create a safer and more efficient system.
But wouldn't that kind of take the fun out of flying? You know, there's something exciting about knowing there's a skilled pilot up there.
That's true. There's a certain romance to it, but the people who support autonomous flight say it could make flying more accessible and affordable for everyone.
Okay.
And it could reduce congestion and environmental impact.
So it's like trading the human element for potentially more safety, efficiency, and access.
Exactly. And it's a discussion that's going to keep going as the technology gets better.
It's crazy to think about how these things will shape the future, but it also makes me wonder if we're losing something in the process, you know, that sense of adventure, the trust in human skill.
I get what you mean. It's important to remember that technology is a tool.
Right.
And how we use it is what really matters. The challenge is embracing these new advancements while still holding on to the values and traditions that make aviation so cool.
So it's not about replacing humans. It's about finding ways for technology and human expertise to work together.
Exactly.
Okay, we've talked about AI, autonomous flight. These are some pretty big ideas.
Yeah.
What other frontiers are out there?
Well, there's the final frontier.
Cat.
Yes.
Oh, wow, space travel. That's a whole other level.
It is.
We're talking about regular people going into space now, not just astronauts. The stakes are even higher.
Oh, absolutely. Space travel brings a whole new set of challenges. Radiation exposure, microgravity,
Yeah.
designing and launching spacecraft. It's a lot.
It's hard to imagine the level of expertise needed to keep people safe in those environments.
It is. It's completely different from flying within the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah.
But the things we're learning from this early space tourism will definitely help improve aviation safety overall.
It's exciting and a little scary at the same time.
It is. We're entering a new era of aviation,
Yeah.
one that goes beyond our planet, and safety will always be
Right.
the most important thing.
Okay, so in this part, we've talked about the impact of crashes,
Mhm.
efforts to reduce human error and stress.
Right.
We even touched on AI, autonomous flight, and space travel.
We did.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
It's inspiring and a little overwhelming how this field is constantly changing.
It's a dynamic field for sure, and it shows human ingenuity and our desire to make the skies safer.
I'm ready to move on to the last part of our deep dive, where we can talk about what this all means for us as passengers
Okay, sounds good.
and how we can think about flying in a more informed way.
Let's do it. It's important to remember that even though there are risks, flying is still one of the safest ways to travel.
All right, good to know.
And by understanding how complex aviation safety is,
Yeah.
we can appreciate all the work that goes into protecting us and feel more confident when we fly.
All right, so we've been on this journey, right, exploring this world of aviation safety, the causes of crashes, the impact, all the efforts to mitigate those risks, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
But now let's think about us, right? The passengers.
Okay.
What does all this mean for us?
It's been a really fascinating deep dive, and I think the most important takeaway for anyone who flies is this. Air travel is incredibly safe.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Statistically, it's one of the safest ways to travel.
Okay.
Get from point A to point B.
Right, but I think it's also important to remember that accidents do happen.
Oh, of course.
And when they do, the consequences can be devastating.
Yeah, and no system is perfect, right? I mean,
Right.
there are always risks when you're talking about transportation, and that includes air travel.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
Right.
Like, on the one hand, it's statistically very safe, but on the other hand, these accidents do happen.
Yeah, I think it's about finding a balance, acknowledging those risks, but also appreciating all the effort that goes into minimizing them,
Right.
We should be informed,
Right.
but not paralyzed by fear.
So it's like walking this tightrope between being aware and being anxious.
Exactly.
That's-
You can learn about the safety measures,
Yeah.
trust the professionals,
Okay.
and follow those safety guidelines, all without letting fear control your travel choices.
So being empowered by knowledge rather than overwhelmed by it,
Exactly.
the more you know about it, the better you can kind of like wrap your head around it.
Yeah, and remember that aviation safety is always evolving.
Okay.
They're always learning from what happened in the past,
Sure.
using new technology, refining the procedures, all to make it safer for everyone.
So even though these things happen, it's good to know that they're like committed to making it safer.
Yeah, that's really the core of it.
Okay.
This constant pursuit of improvement, learning from every incident and just always trying to make things better.
So if there was one message you could give to the listeners, what would it be? What should people keep in mind when they're, about to board that plane?
I'd say remember that aviation safety is a shared responsibility. It's not just on the industry or the professionals, it's on the passengers too.
So it's not just the pilots, the engineers, air traffic controllers, it's everybody working together
Exactly.
to create that culture of safety.
Yes, and as passengers, we can do our part by being informed, prepared, and following those safety guidelines, being aware of our surroundings, paying attention to the safety briefings,
Right.
and trusting the professionals who are trying to get us where we need to go safely.
It's like being a good co-pilot,
Yeah.
even if you're just in your seat.
I like that. We're all part of the flight crew in a way.
Right.
And if we work together, we can keep making the skies safer for everyone.
I feel like this whole deep dive has given me a new perspective on it all,
Yeah.
It's easy to just like take it for granted when you're thinking about your vacation or your business trip. But now I see all the work that goes into it, making it safe.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? From the engineers to the pilots, the controllers, the maintenance crews, and yeah, even the passengers, we all play a part.
It's a story that keeps going,
It does.
with new chapters all the time as we see these new technologies and possibilities.
It is exciting to think about the future, knowing that safety is always going to be the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good place to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah, it has been fascinating. Thanks for sharing all your insights.
My pleasure, and thanks to everyone for listening.
We hope you learned something new.
And maybe had some of your questions answered.
So next time you're at the airport, take a moment to think about all the people working to get you to your destination safely.
Yeah, all those people behind the scenes, from the ground crew to the pilots, all dedicated to making your journey smooth and safe.
And even though accidents can happen, remember, flying is still one of the safest ways to travel.
So relax. Enjoy the ride.
Have a great flight.
Safe travels, everyone.
We'll see you next time.